Stream is starting. Refresh my page. It's live. Great. Mute it before I hurt myself. Alright. Cool. Okay. So, actually, let me find my other test in case Aiden and Trenton show up. I swear I saw one of them, but I don't know where they are. Okay. So, any questions from y'all before we get started? I mean, I don't know what, but might as well. I guess as a reminder, the second paper is due at the end of April. I mean, I guess sort of the end of April. Let me check my calendar. Yes. Which would be which would be Easter Monday for us, the 21st. So a little less than a month from now. And technically, the default topic is like who started World War One, or who you feel like is responsible for World War One. Again, you can go all sorts of directions with that, but you're more than welcome to do other stuff. There's lots of material to draw from, not only from just since Napoleon up until now, but from now until we even get to World War One. Even though like this literally leads up to World War One, but we've got stuff before we get there. Are y'all ready for your test?
Yes.
Okay, you want to take it in here or in the testing center?
Whatever, we can do whatever. We can do it in here.
Okay. You same? Okay. Cool. Well, just put your stuff aside, including your phones, and yeah. So just have a seat. And yeah, like usual, tax credit and stuff is on the back. Okay. So we do have 3 chapters again until test 3, and then I also want to do 2 more until the final. So we need to move things along a little bit. I'm going to try to get this done. So yeah, there's a lot to do. So let's do it. So those of you in my American history class, which at this point is half of you, may recall us talking about the waves of immigration. Well, now we have waves of colonization coming out of Europe. So the first wave of colonization was the Americas, which you say that to an Irishman and they will be very pissed about that. But relatively speaking, you got the Americas, which were seen as like neo-Europes, due to the native populations being largely wiped out by disease, which again, those of you that had my American history class last semester, there was a lot of that. So since the natives couldn't really be used to like work and make stuff for the European powers, they just set up little Europes. I mean, just look at the naming for like everything in North and South America. You've got New England, and then Canada was called New France, and Mexico was called New Spain. They really tried. I mean, and even like the states now, New York and New Jersey, um, it's just those are regions in England. So yeah, they would adopt European customs. The colonists would often intermarry with whatever native or slave populations remained. Um, then they would create what were known as Creoles, which was a mix of European and non-European ancestry, which there's a lot to unpack there. We'll move on a little bit later. Um, After the various revolutions, America, Haiti, and Iberian, which is to say basically all of Central and South America, decided that they didn't like Spain anymore. Um, these neo-Europes broke away, all except for like Canada, because they were fine. They didn't care. Which resulted in eventually the 1823 Monroe Doctrine, which again, those of you in my American history class should remember this. We talked about this a couple of tests ago. Which essentially said for the, again, this is a hybrid course, so there's a lot of you that just aren't physically in here. The Monroe Doctrine essentially said, hey, Europeans, stay out of Western Hemisphere affairs, and therefore America will stay out of Eastern Hemisphere affairs, which is to say, don't bother the Caribbean, and we won't bother your other colonies, which, as we're going to see, wasn't entirely true, but, you know. So this resulted in Europeans moving eastward into India and Asia, which is going to be pretty much the crux of this whole chapter. Also, again, for my American history students, I mentioned that we were going to see the horrible octopus thing again, but this one is somehow much, much worse, because it's not an octopus head. It's John Bull. It's England as a horrible thing. Not even an octopus, because that's way more than 8 hands. God, I hate it. So you've got England, Ireland, and I can't. What's that? Helgoland? I think that might be like an old name for Scotland, perhaps. But it's got its hands in all these other places. So you've got Gibraltar, Boersland, that's South Africa. We'll get to that at the end of the chapter. And Jesus, that's the whole thing. Cape Colony, which should have been over here, like geographically. Cyprus, Jamaica, Canada, India, and Malta, and specifically, they're reaching for Egypt with the canal, which again we'll get into, which is also very important. They were very important behind the building of the Suez Canal, specifically so they could get to India more easily. It's a whole thing. I hate it. Also, the naming, though, the devilfish in Egyptian waters. Devilfish is a really good way to describe England in general, but specifically this horrible monster. It's real good. I like it a lot. I mean, I don't like it, but it's you know. Here is a less horrendous image of that same thing. This is the British Empire at its height. Everything in red is the British Empire. And everything underlined in red is British Empire. It's just too small to see because it's, you know, little islands. I'm sure you've heard the song "Hail Britannia." Hail Britannia, Britannia rules the waves, etc., etc. There's one particular line: "The sun never sets on the empire wide." And when you look at this map, that's true. At no point in time is there not somewhere in the British Empire that it's not daytime. At some point, its daytime in this empire. Even though England is just this little island over here, I'm specifically saying this, not Ireland. It's daytime somewhere because they've got land across the entire world. Now, this isn't a British Empire chapter, but it's mostly going to be about Britain. Because they are the biggest empire at this point. I mean, really, they're going to be the biggest empire until, like, World War II. So, the second wave. So after Napoleon was defeated, European powers are exhausted and near bankrupt. Britain, though, being Britain, recovered the most quickly because they had the world's most powerful navy, massive merchant fleet, markets and industry to take advantage because, well, again, they had all of this. Because remember the whole, like, oh no, Napoleon's going to close off all of Europe to British trade. And Britain's like, oh no, whatever will we do? So yeah, they recover real quick. Also, the thing about the British merchant fleet is the British Empire, this isn't specific, I don't think this is in the book, this is just a thing that's in my head. They very specifically, like, the government put money into the merchant fleet because in the contract was, hey, if we ever go to war, we're putting guns on your ships because you're going to help us out. So, like, at any point in time, if they went to war, and I mean, it's Britain, so at some point they're going to go to war with probably France, they can very easily convert their massive merchant fleet into a halfway decent navy, while they also have a really good navy as a backbone. And then, of course, they got markets and industry because we've already talked about the Industrial Revolution. And then again, that massive empire is just a huge market. British East India Company. We'll talk about India as well because it's hard to make this chapter not just be Britain. Again, I had like an entire graduate level history course on pretty much this chapter that was just the British Empire. I really like this chapter. As dark as this chapter is going to get, like imperialism in this era is so interesting. You got the British East India Company that turned India from some trade posts into this massive colony, and they say specifically a crown colony, which is to say it was actually making money. Most colonies were basically a financial drain on the empire. Like they made money, but there was no net income. They cost more than they made. India made so much money. Now it cost so much money to administer and like keep running, but it made a ridiculous amount of money. So India was the crown jewel of the British Empire. Now going back to not Britain, France and the Netherlands started branching out, and they realized, hey, just trade routes aren't going to do it anymore. So they started trying to completely control trade, which eventually resulted in them also taking land to, again, create just full-on empires. Because, again, earlier this semester we were talking about how like they were taking little trade routes and eventually even taking like trade posts, but they never wanted to like take over regions. Well, we're past that now. Also, if you heard the music coming in, that was Empire Total War, which is a game I've mentioned several times now. This is the British East India Company, because they had their own army, because of course they did. From a gameplay perspective, these troops sucked. They were very, very middle of the road. Now, they weren't expensive because, I mean, they were just conscripts. Um, Again, I played as Britain because they have all the cannons. But it did take me like the entire century they gave you to play to take like half of India because I was apparently playing Britain correctly. Although, as I also said, I did also manage to like keep most of the American Revolution from happening. I guess I kept them happy, so whatever. I guess I win. Um, so yeah, under the rule of the British East India Company, most of it's British. You got under British acquisition, and then the red is technically still Indian territory, but they're dependent on um, British oversight. Again, though, just to reiterate, India was it's not a country as it is today. It was I think it was a sultanate where you've got like one sultan overseeing like dozens, if not hundreds, of little princes, and the princes were actually the ones who held power in these tiny little regions. So they themselves could decide how they wanted to handle things with the British. But the British, being this massive monolithic power, could come in and just like overwhelm each individual prince. And the Sultan, who nominally had control over the whole region, couldn't rally all the princes together to actually resist because not all of them wanted to resist. So there wasn't like a war against India to take it over. There was just resistance here and there, while other Indian princes wanted to work with the British. It was just a big mess. As you can see from this map, it's just a big mess. That was India. There was one major resistance movement, which we'll get to, but India was just a slog at the end of the day. Anyway, early on, colonies were for exploitation. They existed to bring in money, which, we're talking about Europe here. You go out, the colonial officials would just let the charter companies do their thing. Again, we're mostly talking about the British East India Company here. And they didn't want to administer the land because that means, yeah, you get taxes from the people, but if you get taxes, that means you are beholden to like go in and build roads and build schools and build like hospitals, and that's a lot of work. Or you could have the blood sunken company go in and just like run it as a business. And we all know how that goes because we're still in the Industrial Revolution era. Now, I already got ahead of myself, but as I mentioned, later on, colonies were not producing as they had before because, everybody had already gotten all the big, expensive colonies. Now, again, India was the big golden colony that everybody thought was going to be what all the colonies were. Most were drains on the economy, and most were just there to show, hey, we're a big country, we're a big boy country now. We have a colony, because if you have a colony, you're technically an empire. So to take land in a foreign land, to take territory, I should say, in a foreign land would make you a true empire. So to show that you were a great power, for example, Germany and Italy, would grab entirely unprofitable colonies to take their place in the sun, which, again, we'll get to a little bit later, particularly in the scramble for Africa, where they would grab just like pieces of desert to prove that, hey, we can be empires too. Even though there were these pieces of desert, they would still like genocide the natives because, can't just like put a flag there and be like, hey, this is ours now, keep doing what you're doing. Obviously, the people who were living there weren't super cool with these randos in boats showing up and deciding that they own the place now. So once the subjugated people were rising up, there was this. Well, before the full-on genocide, they of course made these excuses that no, this was for the benefit of them. Europeans are bringing the light of civilization to these poor backward races. This is for their own good. This is the same sort of argument that was made, for slavery. That slavery is for the good of the enslaved. Because if it wasn't for us, how would they know how civilization works? Yeah. Don't worry, it gets worse. Anyway, on to India. Yeah. I forgot that I started with this really great understatement. India was a long-term project for the British. The British really like to understate things. For example, thank you. There was this like multi-year long civil war in Ireland where the Irish were attempting to gain independence. It basically led to domestic terrorism for years, and it was known as the Troubles. The British just called it the Troubles. So yeah, the British like understating things. So to call this a long-term project, as I said in my Empire Total War playthrough, it took me literally the entire 100 years they give you. So just to give you an idea of how long this actually took. As I said, they started with trading posts, allied with local princes that wanted to aid them against the princes that wouldn't, because again, the princes didn't get along, so they used the British as a tool against their rivals. The British East India Company led armies consisting of sepoys, who were native Indian troops who conquered territory of those who resisted. So I showed you guys the picture from the game of the British East India Company troops. Those were pretty rare because they typically would just conscript natives to do their fighting because that was even cheaper. However, they lost their monopoly over Indian trade due to free trade becoming like the thing. And instead, they took over governing India, because making a company the sole governing body of what was essentially, and really today even, the second most populous region in the world is a great idea. They decided to attempt to civilize the natives, to help them, and also to open further markets for trade. I'll get into that a little bit later as well, what that's all about. There's also this term, I don't think it's a slur. It's used in the book, so it shouldn't be. It's not a nice word. Anyway, there's this term in India called Babu, which is a mixed Anglo-Indian heritage that was like this sort of middle class, not like economic middle class, but like a racial middle class between the British and the Indians. So while they were treated better than the natives, they were still not treated as proper Englishmen. So they were like the Creoles we mentioned before. They were the children of Anglo-Indian, I guess you'd say, marriages. However, they were still seen as like an underclass, but they were treated better than the natives. There's just like layers of racism. But they were seen as necessary for continued British dominance because they were able to speak to the natives better than the British could, and they were treated slightly better by the British. But there's also, like, even today, there's this animosity towards Indian people of more Anglo descent because of this preference for them by the British. So, like, anyone who runs for office in India who is more light-skinned is called a babu as sort of a, I guess you'd say, is sort of a slur, as at least it's not a polite thing to say. So yeah, that's still a thing in India. Not so much as like they're seen as a higher class of person, but that's still like a social issue. They're also down in South Africa, which was back then called Cape Colony, but had to deal with the Dutch farmers that were already there, known as Boers, which we will get to in greater detail towards the end of the chapter. But I wanted to go ahead and mention that because we are going to jump right into it once we get to it at the end of the chapter. So yeah, by the way, Boer is just the term. The Dutch farmers in South Africa, it's a weird sort of situation that they were in. They weren't a colony of the Netherlands. They were just like a group of Dutch that ended up in South Africa and settled there and like made their own government. So they weren't like tied to the Netherlands, like how Cape Colony was tied to England. Because they actually made their own language, which was a combination of Dutch and like the regional African dialects, so it's known as Afrikaans, Afrikaans, I believe is how it's pronounced. They, until extremely recently, well, I say extremely recently, they practiced slavery until more recently than America, and until very recently, they were real big into, what's the word? Segregation. Yeah, that's South Africa, by the way. That's modern-day South Africa. This still like largely where, oh yeah, all the white people are in charge, and the majority black population is like an underclass. Yeah. And in case y'all don't know, that's where Elon Musk is from. If you didn't know that, by the way, he's not American. Anyway, here's baboos. Not baboos. I'm sorry, sepoys. I had that word in my face, in my brain. So yeah, there's your sepoy soldiers. Good native Indian soldiers with their East India Company issued rifles, and that dude's got a pickaxe. Other guy's got like a hatchet, I think. Because I mean, when you're out in the field, you're doing more than just like shooting. You're digging and doing other work. What's that? No. They're just posing. No. They're just posing. But no, they were pulled over because you can see like behind them they've got their guns laying down. They're just like, oh no, you guys hold these tools to show that we have other things besides the muskets. Or the rifles, actually. They don't, not muskets anymore, they've got rifles. Also, the French. So, this is a prestige thing. Charles X, because we're already up to 10 now, began the process of trying to take Algeria in 1827. If you're not familiar with Algeria, it is right there at the northwestern tip of Africa. It is not sub-Saharan, which means it's desert, y'all. But the French decided that after getting their asses whipped by the Prussians, they needed to take some land for prestige's sake, and they just went straight across the Mediterranean to northern Africa, and just decided they were going to take some land. It took them 3 years to take the capital Algiers, which when I show you a map, Algiers is right freaking there on the coast. I don't know how it took them 3 years to take it. Louis Philippe tried to conquer the hinterlands, which took his entire reign. And this was the time that the French Foreign Legion was created to raise troops. So they were like bringing in people from other countries to help them take this swath of desert. Obviously, Algeria put up quite a bit of a fight. The leader, Abd al-Qadir, al-Qadir, I think is how it's pronounced, was the leader. He was defeated in 1847, so that is 20 years after the process started. That's a fair little while for definitely not a war. That is just we're taking land from these people who started nothing. And again, this is like northern Africa, so to the French, these are, backward people that are, technologically inferior, but it's taking them 20 years to take desert from them. 1848, the Second Republic made Algeria part of France and gave it representation in the National Assembly. However, only the colons, or the French settlers, were given any representation. Because, of course. So while Algeria was made part of the French Republic, only the French settlers were actually allowed to vote. Because obviously. Anyway, there's the capital. It took them 3 years. It took them 3 years. It's on the coast, y'all. I mean, I get that that's the capital, and like that would probably be the most heavily fortified, but like again, the European mindset is that these are all backward, like sand-dwelling barbarians. It took them 3 years to get off of the boat and like take the capital, and it took them 20 years to take not this. Check this out. 1848. This. Actually, is that the right shade? No. This. 20 years. This down here, no, sorry, that's 1956. This down here, 1934. We're talking from 1827 up here, 1930, 100 years. And again, if you look at a map of like Africa, Algeria isn't huge. I mean, it's not a small country. I mean, the countries in Africa aren't small, but Jesus Christ. I mean, granted, some stuff was happening between 1834 and 1934, to be fair, but still. France, if you're going to try to, take stuff over, tie your shoelaces. Okay, so, the Opium Wars. This is where this is where things start getting real bad. Um, I mean, granted, I'm sure that there was all sorts of like horrible atrocities going on in Algeria, um, but I particularly just like the idea of Algeria holding on for like 20 years, and then even when it's like, and then France took Algeria, and it's just like that tiny little strip at the top. Anyway, the Opium Wars. So, the British wanted tea from China. They like tea. I'll get into the whole tea, coffee thing if you're familiar with how Europeans do stuff, but that's in a minute. So the British like tea. However, the trade with China didn't go the way they wanted it to. Which is to say, China doesn't want anything from Britain. Just throw a few things out. What does Britain produce at this time? I mean, remember, Industrial Revolution. What's Britain making? Textiles out of what? Cotton. And just like, what would be the other thing that they made textiles out of? Like, remember, we're talking about like Britain, Scotland, Ireland. What do they have a lot of that you could make clothing out of? That you see on the hills. What? Yeah, so a lot of wool, right? Real warm. Not real comfortable. What do the Chinese have that they make clothes out of? Now, granted, they're like really rich Chinese, but still. Silk. They don't want no damn cotton or wool. They don't want that from the British. So all they want from the British is raw currency, which is to say gold, because everybody can spend gold. So the British don't like this. They want to trade, goods for goods, but the Chinese are like, we don't want any of your crap. We got spices, we got tea, we got silk. We don't want any of your stuff. Forget it. The British, however, did find an end with opium. Now, opium was legal in Britain and like most of the Western world, but not in China. However, there was this big underground opium market in China. And the British started just absolutely piling in the opium to the point that it like caused the port cities to grind to a halt because all the people were just plastered on opium. Like the British just pushed so many drugs on China that it shut the economy down. So the emperor appointed Lin Zexu, I believe is the proper. I had a student who actually spoke Chinese, and she corrected me so many times on this pronunciation, and I feel so bad that I can't probably remember now. It's been like 8 years. So he appointed this guy to stop the opium trade, and boy, this guy was all about stopping the opium trade. He put all the opium in these warehouses and just burned the warehouses to the ground. And by to the ground, I mean like they were on these docks, so they were just out into the water. And closed the market to the British goods. And the British response was not, hey, that wasn't us. We wouldn't be pushing like literal tons of drugs into your country. Their response was, send in the gunboats. And so they did. Thus beginning and ending the First Opium War. Because China, having been more or less isolated from the rest of the world for centuries, couldn't really fight back against steamboats with iron plating and cannons. The Chinese have had gunpowder for centuries, but they've not really upgraded from that point. Like, they got the technology early and were like top dog, and nobody really challenged them, so they stayed at that level. for centuries. And then, meanwhile, over in Europe, everybody's fighting each other, and that causes them to advance. So this led to the Treaty of Nanking, which set up treaty ports, gave Hong Kong to Britain, established extraterritoriality. That is a horrifying word. I'll get to that in a moment. Oh, never mind. It meant that the British were not subject to Chinese law. So, yeah. So, the British, this is also like part of the treaty ports thing. If you're in a treaty port as a British sailor, as a British citizen, and you do a crime, if you kill somebody or you steal something, or what was very common, British soldiers, sailors, etc., exploiting Chinese women, they could not be punished by Chinese law. They would have to go back to Britain and be punished by British law, which was often not punished at all because, well, the Chinese aren't really people. You know, this is the 1800s. It's all racism all the way down. Yeah, well, I mean, even if they do go back to Britain with like, hey, they did this stuff in China, and it's like, hey, don't do that, or hey, you're suspended with pay for like a week, which is basically paid leave. You get a vacation. Like sometimes they would actually go through the proper channels because I mean they had paperwork, but like there was never any. They would go to jail, or they would have to pay a fine, or they would actually, you know, be punished for what they did. It was, yeah, it wasn't full like they could do whatever they want and would not be punished, but it was really close to that. And the treaty ports were basically that, but in these areas, in these ports, they basically weren't Chinese territory anymore. Anyway, another Opium War happened. This was 4 years long, 1856 through 1860, where the British, French, Russians, and Americans all rolled in and decided to carve up China, to take more trade for themselves, legalized opium and Christianity, and gave Russia Vladivostok, which was this much-needed ice-free port. So, not only did they forcefully legalize this drug that had decimated their economy, the issue with Christianity in China was that, well, how many of you are familiar with Jesuits? No? Okay. So, the Jesuits are a branch. Well, not a branch of Catholicism. They're a part of Catholicism. The way I like to describe them is, so think of like Jehovah's Witnesses, where they come to your door, knock on your door, and ask if you've heard the good word. They're like that, but they have swords. They are very violent. Now, granted, not so much anymore, but back then it was like, hey, want to hear the good word, or you want to go on the ground? Yeah, Christianity was not a positive thing to the Chinese. It was very much convert, or, we're going to, like, starve your town, or burn your town, or, etc. So, when I put in opium and Christianity in the same sentence, that's being equated for a reason. This is very of the time. So just FYI. Anyway, here's Lin Zexu, Mr. You don't do drugs in my town. All right. So here is the start of the First Opium War. Here are the Chinese ships, and here are the British ships. Here is a Chinese ship having been hit by a cannonball, and the gunpowder on board going up. They were not prepared for 19th century naval combat. All right, I've got quite a few of these. So we have, actually, I've also got a few of these when we get into the next chapter in my American history course as well. So here we have the various European and also Americas here powers fighting over essentially the corpse of China. You know, you've got the Grand Chinese Dragon here. So America here in the back. You've got Russia, obviously the big bear. This is Britain as the lion. There are no lions in Britain, but the lion has always been the symbol of Britain. That's just the thing. Germany back here as this eagle. Austria as the two-headed eagle because of Austria-Hungary. Italy has always been a wolf, so that's pretty neat. Japan is, interestingly enough, being depicted as a leopard here. So I'm surprised they didn't do something horribly racist like this with Japan, so that's neat. Yeah, Japan was also involved in the Second Opium War, because they had, between the Opium Wars, modernized, which we'll get into a little bit later. I guess this is France. Sorry, France. I think I've got another one. Yeah. Again, not a great depiction of China, but I mean, look at not Queen Elizabeth. Look at Queen Victoria. It's not a great look for Victoria either. So you've got Victoria. I guess this is Wilhelm. Who's in charge in Russia at the time? Nicholas? Again, Japan, and rather than whoever our president was at the time, we just have Colombia here looking over the shoulder as an, oh no, we're not really involved, but we 100% were. Like, oh no, you know, we're concerned, and you know, you really shouldn't be carving up China like that. You know, we were in the middle of it as much as everybody else was. I've got another weird one for those of you in my American history class. That one's coming up. Speaking of Japan, 1853, America sent Commodore Matthew Perry to force Japan to open its ports to trade with gunships. So again, it was, hey, you should open your ports to trade, or we're going to shell your port town. Yeah, we were really into diplomacy back then. Not long after this, the Japanese people felt that their shogun had been kowtowing to the outsiders for too long, and they put the Tokugawa shogunate to an end. A shogun is like a military ruler, not an emperor. So they got rid of the shogun and began the Meiji Restoration, which is to say we're restoring the empire, restoring the old emperor. So they got rid of a lot of the old practices of the shogunate, began borrowing ideas and technologies from Prussia, including their constitution, which they had put into place in 1891. So they basically looked at the West. It's like, okay, who did really good in a really short amount of time? Prussia. Because as we saw last chapter, Prussia just all of a sudden went from like this little village of Brandenburg into a major power. So Japan's like, that one, we're going to do that. And by 1900, Japan had created its own industrial economy and told the Europeans to bugger off. And they did. So Japan went from like pretty much at the same level as China, so easily exploited. Their technology hadn't really done anything since like the 1400s, to within basically 50 years, they were a peer nation with the rest of the West. They were the same level of technology. They had a constitution like Prussia, which, I mean, again, they basically just stole it. Well, I always like to say they copied their homework. And became so militarily powerful they were able to tell the Europeans to go home, or they would press the issue, like Matthew Perry was going to. And as we will see later on, they showed that they could when they beat the crap out of Russia. I mean, there's Matthew Perry with his, like, face melting off. This is also, the Meiji Restoration is, how do I put this? Meiji Restoration is a really emotional time for the Japanese. This is like the end of the samurai. This is that era when the samurai are coming to an end. This is also that era when, like, the idea of the honorable samurai and the Code of Bushido, when all that was written, like when we were talking about the chivalry stuff last semester, it's when they're no longer needed that they start writing all this fiction of, oh, but they were totally all this other stuff before. So yeah, this is the time when all that stuff came about. And by the way, those of you familiar with anime, this is the time that Rurouni Kenshin was set. So yeah, this is that real contentious period of Japanese history. Meanwhile, Russia, they had their hands on what would become Alaska, as well as the expansion into the south towards the Black Sea, because, well, they wanted to get to water that wasn't frozen half of the year. Because I mentioned Vladivostok, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I mentioned Catherine the Great had begun this movement south. She cut deals with local rulers or simply redrawing maps, because, you know, why not be underhanded if you can? However, we have Mikhail Vorontsov, who is this governor general in the Black Sea region of New Russia, because, you know, again, naming. Let's see, Mikhail, no, wrong Mikhail. Yeah, Vorontsov. I gotta make sure I've got that spelled right, because it just doesn't look right. They built libraries and schools to help the urban elite, but in the rural areas there was this brutal military campaign that just wiped people out and led to resistance. So we've got Muslims and Circassians and Dagestans and Chechnya that resisted the Russians for generations, which led to ethnic cleansings, wars, expulsions. This is, and I know this is weird to say considering all the other stuff happening right now, this is one of the most dangerous places in the world today, still. Dagestan, Chechnya, to this day, I wouldn't say it's an active war zone, but they are still fighting down there. The Chechens, the Russians, they're still killing each other to this day. And it's just a fact of life down there. Because, as we all know, the Russians really like to expand into other people's territory. I think I've got a better image here. Here we go. Yeah, so there's Chechnya and Dagestan. So it's this region let's see, where are we at? So there is Kyrgyzstan. So yeah, it's just this like region down here along the Black Sea, and they just decided that they were going to wipe these people out. By the way, yeah, there's Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan. I remember they took Odessa. This was in the last 10 or 20 years because I remember they invaded Georgia during. This was a couple of Olympics ago, and that was like a whole big thing. And I think I must have been in high school. Wow, this has been a while then. And like the news came out that Russia was invading Georgia, and one of my idiot classmates was like, "I've got an aunt and uncle that live in Georgia." It's like, not the state south of us, you idiot. Georgia hasn't landed on our coast and is invading the state directly south of us. That'd be a little bit bigger news than, oh, by the way, Russia's invading Georgia. Anyway. Oh yeah, and speaking of the brutal Governor General, by the way, I put this together in like 2014, so some things just never change. Anyway, there he is, Mikhail Vondtsov. Okay. Let's go back to India real quick. I try to get as much done as I can since we need to go. Yeah, so India was a model colony, turned huge profits, outstripped the cost of actually pacifying the subcontinent, which, as I said, took a while. However, in 1857, everything changed. There were rumors that the standardized cartridges that the rifles used were using cow fat, which was sacred to the Hindus, or pig fat, which was seen as unclean to the Muslims. Now, the way these cartridges worked, I've got a picture that I'll show you guys in a minute, but basically, there were these little paper cartridges that had the bullet in them, they had the gunpowder in them, they had the little wad, they had the whole thing. So we've all seen, reenactments or whatever from like the musket days where you had to put the ball in and ram it down, put the little wad of paper in, ram it down, put the powder, or vice versa, put the powder in first. That wouldn't work. Put the powder in first. And you have to go through the whole process. With this, you bite the end off, pour the whole thing in, ram it down once, and you're done. You're ready to shoot. However, in order to lubricate the whole thing, they had to use some kind of animal fat because, this was before there was any kind of synthetic lubrication. Well, what kind of fat would they use but pig or cow, because those are going to be the common animals that they would have around. And in India, one of them is going to be a problem. Because, Hindu is going to be like the major religious population, but I want to say 30 to 40% of the population is Muslim. They're right up there with them. So it's a problem. They had to bite off the top of the cartridge, and either way it's going to be an issue. In May, 85 soldiers were sentenced to 10 years hard labor for refusing to use the cartridges, and the lead objector was hanged. Yeah, Britain, maybe you overplayed your hand a little bit there. Obviously, this sparked outrage. Not just the cartridges, obviously, but how Britain decided to handle it. So, this Sepoy Rebellion, as it was called, was real bad. Let me see. Boo, doo, 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 doo. Here we are. Fighting was brutal. Civilians were attacked. rebels murdered women and children in the settlements of Campur. British press steam reports of white women raped by Moors, which is their term for the Muslims, which a Moor is specifically a Spanish Muslim, but whatever. British troops committed atrocities as well. They sewed Muslim prisoners into pigskins, then sent them to the gallows or shot them from cannons. One commander ordered Indian prisoners to lick up the blood of their victims. I should mention the cannon thing. So, I think it's specifically the Indians. There's a belief. I think it's Indian culture, where your body needs to be whole in order to pass on to the next life. So they would tie prisoners to the front of cannons, still alive, and to execute them, they would fire the cannon. Needless to say, the body would not be in one piece afterward. Now granted, the rule was never really in any danger of, the British rule was never in any real danger of being overthrown. It took a year and a half to crush the revolt, and again, atrocities across the board. But it did show that the British maybe needed to watch themselves. Parliament took direct control over Indian administration because you don't let a company run a country. Okay. You also don't let a company run a town, but, well, get to that later. They began sending funds in to modernize India's infrastructure, and they backed off a little bit on, trying to change the Indian civilization, or at least their culture, because, you start messing with people's beliefs and lifestyles, and they get a little pissy. All right, here we go. Again, this shows you better than I could. So you've got you've got the whole package here. It's in, I think it was actually in wax paper, and it's got grease all on the inside. And it's got the bullet, the powder, and you would just bite off one end, you bite off this end, and you just pour it down the barrel. So you've got all the powder, the bullet, and it's also lubricated, so it all goes down to the bottom. You just ram it down. Relatively easy, because again, it's lubricated already, and then you're ready to go. It says even here you can rams the paper, bullet, and powder into the bottom barrel, so you can even dump the whole thing in there, because the paper is not going to stop a bunch of gunpowder from going off. So yeah, it made the system much more effective. Again, however, the issue was religious in nature. So here we have, again, weirdly enough, Fine Art of America for an extremely British image. Again, this is a very propaganda piece on, oh no, look how brutal the sepoys are being. They're overrunning the, obviously, military fortification. For some reason, there's a woman and child here. I guess they were manning the cannon. I don't know what that's about. I also don't know what this dude's doing. It looks like he's capping himself. He would rather go out like that than be captured by these barbarians because they're going to torture him or whatever. Again, because the British totally wouldn't do that. Wear the shoe on the other foot. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that it wouldn't have happened because the sepoys were pissed, and they 100% were going to mess up the British if they got their hands on them. But it was not one-sided. But again, I feel like this is a little. I don't know what little Timmy here is doing with the cannon, but you're always going to see that in British propaganda. All right. Speaking of that, let's at least go here. I think this is. Yeah, this will be a good place to finish up. So, between 1815 and 1914, there was no major war in Europe. We mentioned the various wars that Prussia started, all the little rebellions happening in Europe, but there was no like Napoleon level war happening in Europe, not until 1914, which is not next chapter, but after. However, the rest of the world was constantly in conflict because Europe was constantly expanding, and the natives were not happy with that. So those that were doing the fighting were, and I hate that this hasn't changed either, typically lower class, escaping poverty or debt. Because, join the military and they'll pay for your college and you can get health care that ends up actually being really garbage. Because I know a lot of veterans and the VA sucks. Anyway, mortality rate for colonial soldiers was incredibly high. Not just because when you get to the colony that you're going to fight in, you get shot. But hey, did you know, from me telling you this multiple times, that traveling by boat in the 1800s was terrible and you would die of disease? Both in transit and the colony. Actually, also, you had a 50-50 chance of not just dying from getting shot, but actually just of disease in whatever colony you were going to, because you are a lily-white European coming from England, and you're going to, like, Australia. You're going to die of some horrible disease your body has never encountered before. You will probably never make it to the front lines. Also, the, quote, savages they were fighting were typically much better armed and prepared than they thought they were. Once again, it took the French 3 years to take the capital of Algeria, which was on the coast. However, that said, most of the colonial soldiers were natives. So we talked about the sepoys. They were either paid or coerced into helping the European powers. Because, it can be, hey, we'll give you money or land or whatever to help us, or we'll murder your family. Either way works. You help us. Also, and again, those of you that have had my European course may recognize this, I have this really great image of these British soldiers in what appears to be somewhere in Africa, where they're just like hanging out. Now, originally, I found this before I found that picture of the Buffalo Soldiers for my European class, or my American class, and I thought, wow, this is goofy, this is funny, this is normal. This is how they took pictures in the 1800s. You had a bunch of dudes sitting up, looking all proper, and then you had one dude like chilling. Although he's got a cigarette. He's just extra. But again, 1800s, they've all got these massive mustaches. They've got their like safari helmets. Yeah, this is great. All right, that'll have to do it for us today. I'll see if I can knock out the rest of the chapter on Wednesday. Today is Monday. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, that's all I got. I'll see y'all on Wednesday.